Hello and welcome to another episode of the Community Meadow, where we're on this continuous journey where we're finding our tribe. I'm Morg and I'm joined by Mighty. We're back after a few weeks off, partly because I got COVID, but also because life happens sometimes.
Mother's Day happened,
Mother's Day.
and then democracy happened, and then we spent like 20 minutes laughing uncontrollably before we could start recording.
So
it's fine.
All these things that goes into crafting these perfect little information snippets about communities in gaming.
Oh yes, our very finely tuned community machine of the two of us.
So today we're going to be talking about how we deal with all different kinds of ages within gaming communities, and a big part of that is going to be people under the age of 18.
That's right.
So the first I guess to dive into this topic. Sorry, I was just trying to work out where we were.
That's right. I'll ramble for a bit. I can get started. First off, right, I think one of the beauties of being online in general, specifically gaming, because that's what I mostly do online, is that age generally shouldn't be that much of a factor. Like you are whoever you are, and as far as online stuff goes, your age there's nothing that really precludes you from being able to participate in an online community based off of your age, unless your age also comes with horrifically debilitating conditions that mean you can't operate a keyboard. So the part of it is like it's kind of nice in that sort of sense that you can have a really good you can actually experience cross-generational friendships. When we sort of grow up and go through school and things like that, we get really stratified, like it's sort of like, I'm in year 8, but don't talk to the year 10s. They're like 2 years older than us, Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like you very early on get kind of learned to sort of, you should generally stay, socializing with people who are around your same age, which you naturally want to do anyway. But it also does mean that it's sort of, there's like a natural awkwardness when it comes to making friends who are beyond that range. Because in terms of like real physical life, you don't often, the kind of life that we each lead would lead us to be in different places. And you would generally find people who are around the same area as you. You wouldn't, like, I don't know about you, but I don't really go to nursing homes that often. So it's harder to meet people who are a bit older and be able to make those sort of friendships.
Yeah, but then you get developers who sort of, or I should say more publishers who start developing, specific MMOs where you sort of corral sort of the similar aged under 18-year-olds for a MMO, which was what, three realms?
So Free Realms was one of many, right? There's like Free Realms, there's 3D Realms. A lot of them use the phrase Realms. I think there was one which was like Adventure Quest or Adventure Quest Worlds. Lots of these sort of games tended to target kids just because, they're cartoon graphics, very easy to get into. A lot of them were like web-based at the time as well. They were like, it's something that you'd see on Newgrounds. And so there was a time, and that's when you get like your Club Penguins and those sort of
I
ones.
was a Club Penguin kid.
You're a Club Penguin kid? Oh,
yeah,
nice.
Meat on the iceberg, throw some snowballs.
Yeah, 1v1 me, bro. And so one of the weirder things was when they were shutting down Free Realms, Sony at the time, now Daybreak Games, some of the moderators were sort of talking about the differences in moderating different ranges of user bases. And they were sort of saying how, like, these especially Free Realms, like, kids were awful to each other. And, like, obviously online already has a pretty bad issue with people just generally being crap to each other. But apparently it was, like, even worse on platforms such as that. And that's even before you start getting into the more the more predatory stuff that when you have people targeting like Minecraft or Roblox communities who aren't underage.
Do you know
And so
if
that was always.
do you know if like Sony had cyberbullying policies in place during that time? I know it was early 2010, so there wasn't a whole lot of discussion around that area.
They sort of did, but you had to be able to really prove it. Like, they would take some pretty serious actions against players that were, habitually harassing people. But you, as the victim, had to almost sort of go to the doctor and, get a certificate that said, "Excuse me, X77 Swaglord 69X was mean to me on the internet, and it affected my daily life," which is a pretty hard thing probably would have been a pretty hard thing to get back then. I think that sometimes the conversation about sort of online life affecting your real life nowadays is getting a lot easier to have, but definitely a lot of time in the past it was sort of like they were kind of separate, Nowadays it's all blurring together, man. Are we in the metaverse yet?
Possibly not.
Possibly.
We are in the community meta though. That's definitely.
That's right. That's definitely what's happening. All right. So that was a sort of as a sort of a beginning example there. You do get games and titles where people are the user bases just tend to be one way or another as well. Like I would you're probably a bit more full bottle on Minecraft than I am, but is it safe to say that the Minecraft community's kind of like grown up a little bit? Like it used to be predominantly underage. Is it still predominantly underage, or has it sort of gone from like 14-year-olds to early 20s?
I would say that that's kind of a full bottle question in terms of if you just scroll for the sort of community server list, so people advertising their servers, it's still generally pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll have these different types of rules, right? So you'll have 18 plus communities who really want to play 18 plus. You'll generally find people who are around like 30 or like 30 or who have expendable cash. Will generally try and just get private servers with their friends because they have the money to do that.
Yep.
But in saying that, if they don't quite have gaming friends anymore because everyone's moved on or busy with the kids, then they'll.
Or if they're really lucky, they're playing Minecraft with the kids.
Their own kids.
Their own kids. Yeah.
But yeah, so you'll have these servers that will go, you need to be 18 plus to join this server, no exceptions. The other side of the coin, you'll have servers that will go, you need to be mature, and they'll go off a maturity rating. But how do you measure that is that a hard question. And
it can also be like if you have one of those sort of rules where you sort of say, like your general attitude and maturity is what needs to happen, but if you're young, you're going to make mistakes eventually. It's just part of learning how to interact with people. And then so you might be, 80, 90% what people would consider to be mature. But then what happens if you goof up? Like, then do people start blaming it on your age, or is it just because someone made a mistake? Because I wouldn't necessarily say that those particular experiences are limited to a particular time in your life. Some people just have them at different points. Yeah,
everyone makes mistakes at some point. It's
exactly.
It's part of the learning process.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when people, especially when your younger community members make a mistake, and then you as a community leader start to attribute it to they're 14, they're always going to act like this type way, and then you remove them. You sort of have those maturity rules that, hey, you need to be mature in this server because you want to just not deal with the drama. You're there to play games and have fun and not sort of deal with immature people. But also, when someone stuffs up once and they're just because they're young and they don't know any better, you can correct that behavior pretty easily. And if they don't sort of correct it as well, then obviously you can remove them from your community if that's the mature rule.
It is an interesting one too, because it's sort of, especially if you have different people who make a same or a similar mistake, and the only difference is their age. Like if there's any sort of punishment that's brought out, one would argue that it needs to be the same for both people. But sometimes just because someone's younger, they might suffer a harsher one because it's easier to do that. I've worked a lot with like youth and underage in that sort of stuff, and one of the main differences I find is that like young folks who are still sort of teenagers growing up and finding their thing, it's really easy to get them to sort of change their behavior, because you just say, oh hey, that's dumb, don't do it, and most of the time they'll tend to listen. Sometimes you might have to take your time and explain, hey, here's why, and that sort of stuff, but most of the time they'll at least give you the time of day. Whereas what can sometimes happen when you're dealing with folks who have gotten past that point in their life, from this is all just my general experience, I wouldn't say it's a hard and fast scientific rule, is that they're nicer to you, they do listen more, they do tend to get things right the first time, but when they make mistakes, they tend to commit to them really quickly. So you might give a really good explanation of how to do a thing, either they misheard you or they just misinterpreted it, something like that. And then you go to correct them, and then they arc up, they're like, why didn't you tell me? And you're like, I kind of did. And it sort of becomes like why are you they're less resistant to, they're more resistant, I should say, to that sort of considerate, like that self-reflection. If you need to bring it upon them.
and I find they do, if they feel like they've been wronged, they will double down on a sort of bad behavior in a sort of way to be they're
really sticking it to the man, right?
Exactly. That's the perfect way to put it. And that just comes with I guess the difficulties with dealing with a sort of younger community members.
Yeah. And that being said, though, one of the nicer things about having either younger players or newer players in a community, I find, is that they bring an enthusiasm for the game that if you've got several hundred or thousand hours in a game, it's nice to have that enthusiasm around you again, because it's really easy to get into a game. You get jaded. I've played 2,000 hours of this game. I'm going to leave a negative review on Steam because apparently that's how it works. And so what can happen is if you have a community that's got a nice mix of like new players or young players and veterans or older players, it's the enthusiasm that comes from the younger players helps, at least for myself, I can certainly say, it helps keep me interested, because I want to help other people get better and enjoy themselves more. And being able to at least being around that enthusiasm that I know that I felt when I first started something, it helps remind me why I really enjoyed doing it in the first place as well, because it is very easy once you get used to it to sort of, it's like cocaine, right? Sometimes you just need more.
just one more bump.
Yeah. Like just more. Just give me more of that thing that I like. Oh look, there's more people to enjoy it with. Yeah, buddy.
Another a great angle I sort of see it is it's also giving you the opportunity to sort of craft the next generation of sort of standards and what's acceptable within that games community, because at the end of the day, they'll probably be sticking around longer than you eventually, as your other commitments come up with kids or work.
Yeah, exactly. Like life just changes. And I think that's one of the interesting things with a lot of communities as well, is like you always need new blood coming into it, more or less, because otherwise people will just naturally, they'll age out or have something else that comes up, and having more people coming through helps to offset that churn. I've seen communities that started out quite large, but they were fairly large communities, but they also were quite insular. And so over time, like we're talking years worth of time, these communities just gradually shrank and shrank and shrank, because they weren't really they weren't really attracting new people on a broad sense. They were sort of like, they were really, 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 really specific about what they wanted, and they could also be hostile to people who weren't that. And so Johnny Rando, who might be casually looking for a community to join, he doesn't necessarily see the good that those people can bring. He'll see them being hostile or frustrated to people that they view as another, and then he doesn't join it. And overall, the community sort of over time, it just sort of eats itself, and then it's kind of gone, which is really sad.
Yeah.
But then again, nothing is forever.
Yeah.
Don't be sad it's over. Be glad it happened, etc., etc.
Smile.
Do the best you can,
But yeah,
yeah.
That's a real good point. Like in a community, a community is never going to be completely drama free. Drama will come up at some point, which does cause people to leave. So having a good influx of people of any age is better than none.
Yeah, and like drama is, most communities fortunately tend to be self-selecting. Like people are generally drawn to like-minded things. So the drama for one community might be really explosive, whereas this other community might have something that they label as drama, which was like, can you believe he changed his profile picture 2 pixels to the left and gave it a pink border? Like, and like, that's the talk of the town, baby. Like, oh boy, it's a miracle we got through that. Meanwhile, you got other communities that are having,
actually imploding.
Yeah, like proper drama. Got a good old race war going on over on this part of the internet. Like,
not something you want to be involved in ever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's everyone kind of naturally is. Or it's difficult, but it is worth learning which hills you really want to die on, because you can't, you don't have time for every hill.
Or do you? No.
Or do you? Yeah.
Nothing lasts forever.
That's right. So speaking,
we had a rough conversation around duty of care before we came on, and we thought this was a very interesting topic to sort of delve into.
Yes, all right. We'll go through the hard stuff before we get to the last little bit of fun stuff on the notes.
Yes.
So one of the weirdnesses when you get into a multi-generational hobby such as gaming is certain countries, we're in Australia for reference, which has laws, are pretty specific about how people should interact with kids, or like everyone can get very, if someone is underage, you do have to be kind of careful how you conduct yourself to a certain degree, because fortunately with gaming, I don't think there's anything that's particularly enshrined, like legally or with precedent case law. But most of the time, if you are working in or around kids, you need to have like a police check or a working with children's check or some sort of thing that sort of says, hey, this person is not a danger to children. Now, if you're online, and you're sort of running a server, like, you get the moral panic quite commonly where people go, oh, the internet's dangerous for kids. And like I had to have a conversation with people like a week and a half ago about how about Discord as a platform, for example. And I had to sort of say like they had this really scary idea that it was like completely packed with predators. But that's, with Discord, everything's kind of a walled garden. So unless you're really out there on Discord, like just randomly surfing the Discord like you would the internet, it's pretty difficult to run across that. Unless you're impressionable, which of course is the big problem. So Judy, you go.
It's like I was playing just DayZ when I was 14 years of age, and met a 40-year-old, but we just started playing with, nothing predatory there, but anywhere you go on the internet, even in a game like DayZ where it's just an open world map and it's huge, like the chances of running into all different types of players is never ending it, but also still hard to run into people. Just because you can doesn't mean it's happening all the time.
Yeah. And it can be sort of like we were saying earlier, when you're early in life, we do tend to get a little bit naturally like stratified with your age. Like it's weird to talk to someone who's too far beyond your age unless you have a specific reason to do so. And that's kind of one of those things that you get with these sort of concerns as well with regards to your duty of care stuff. It can sometimes be really scary to even interact with other people's kids because they're other people's kids, like you don't want to hurt their baby, because like any teacher or swimming instructor or anything will say, like, half the time the kids are fine, the parents are the worst, and I think some of that is there is some level of that present in gaming, because if you fortunately, like I say, I don't think there's any sort of legal precedent for it. But what if you run a game server and then a young kid joins, has a really bad experience, talks to their parents, and then the parents might go, okay, if they can't really bug the developers about this, what about the person who put up the server where the concern was? Like people might. I think there's a real sort of. There's a sort of grey area there, which I think is my natural instinct is just like, no, not interested in the grey areas. I'm staying away from them.
And it also stems down to sort of fear of technology sometimes with the parents. I know at my last job, my boss went to one of the school's information nights around technology, and they pretty much were demonizing technology to all the parents at the school. I'm not saying this happens at all the schools, but it is happening out there, and can stem with them blaming someone running their server for the terrible time their child has in that environment, even though it's not really on them to police where their child's going and what they're sort of exposed to on the server.
Yeah. And it's interesting where sometimes you go to, like, I have heard stories of people who've gone to those sort of school nights to sort of talk about stuff to do with gaming and games and things like that. And the level of like information that a lot of these parents are really hungry for is really basic. Like you'd have to explain to people how DLC works, or like, okay, you have to be careful with your Apple sign in because it's got like a 15-minute timer after you put the password in. So if your kid's using your phone after that, they could actually spend your money for like 15 minutes after you bought something for them on the App Store. They might not realize it, and like it's all really basic stuff, but let me rephrase that. It's basic for us because we're, gamers, we get it. But for people who are sort of like observing it from a distance, it's impenetrable, like we got a whole other language and, it's wild. It's pretty dangerous.
Who do you blame? Yourself for not knowing, or,
exactly.
The person on the other side of the screen that you can sort of dehumanize because you're not seeing them face to face.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the wildly scary part, but the fun parts. One of the more interesting things that's kind of been a trend with regards to the sort of age discussion in video games recently is a lot of esports players, right? Now, about like probably a decade ago now, convenient. This will be convenient. People were playing StarCraft professionally a lot. Like StarCraft was like the game that you played pro in. And a lot of those guys had careers that were measured in like maybe 2 or 3 years, like, it's better to burn out than fade away sort of stuff. Admittedly, there was less money in it than there was now. There was still an appreciable amount of money. But nowadays there is a lot more games, a lot more prize money. And one of the more interesting things that's going around now is we've got players that have got legacies within their games. You've got Faker, League of Legends. You've got players such as like Puppy in Dota. These guys they're all sort of cracking 30 or more. and a lot of time, or Fear, actually, if you remember a guy called Fear, he used to play StarCraft, and then he moved to Dota, and and so these are all players who are starting to get a bit on in life. And a lot of times people, ever since they turned like 25, people are going like, when are they going to retire? Are they going to retire? Are they going to retire? There was always there's a bit of a meme in the Chinese Dota community where there's like Chinese retirement, where they announce their retirement and then 2 weeks later they're playing again. And it's definitely, I find that very interesting as well, because it's one of those, like we're talking about earlier, is how, like age when it comes to video games and things like that, it's not necessarily a big factor. Previously, a long time ago, everyone would just take a lot of really young players with like really good reflexes. But nowadays, a lot of the more esports games have players who have got just decades of experience. And so there was a conversation on one of the Dota ones where last year's TI winners, they were all like under 22. Everyone was really excited for that. But before they started to look like they were going to win, every match they'd go into, everybody was sort of saying like, how are these guys going to go? Like, these guys have got barely 6 combined years of experience between them, and they're up against teams that have got, like between the 5 players on the team, they might have 30 or 40 years worth of professional LAN experience. And so the interesting thing that I find about that is how the conversation has changed. It's not quite so much like, look at this guy, he can move his hands really quickly and click on the things. It's like, how are they going to stack up against this like mountain of experience?
There's a sort of debatable not problem, but aspect there where, are you going to value more on a team of someone who's got a better reaction time and mechanical skill, or are you going to value someone who's been playing on teams for a while and sort of has that that experience with working with other players and just general team soft skills that are going to benefit the entire team rather than just what their role is they're playing.
Yeah, and there's a really good example of this that caused a bit of, shall we say, robust exchange of opinions in the Counter-Strike community a couple of years ago, where what was happening was you'd have your 5 players at your tournament, your LAN, whatever, and you'd have your coach on the comms with them as well. And there was like the Counter-Strike used to have a coach view as well, where you could sort of see everybody's point of view and things like that. And what the Valve themselves made this change, which some people did like, some people didn't like. But the change was that during those sort of tournaments, the coaches could no longer be on, you couldn't be on comms with your team anymore. Because what was happening was teams were finding that instead of having like an in-game leader, they would just sack their in-game leader players, and then they just recruit someone else who was, as they say, all aim, no brain, and then let the coach do all the calling. So what was actually happening is you're essentially playing 6v5 because the coach was doing all of the calls and the things. Valve ultimately looked at that and were like, well, hang on, that's not representative of the experience that you're going to get playing online. You want to play a 5v5 game, not a 6v, not their 6v5. And so that change was made. Some tournaments even made a big point of having their local rules be that was still allowed versus others. And I think that was a really interesting sort of thing, because it does sort of suck for the players who are, like you say, they've got those soft skills, they've got those charismatic skills. There was a player on one of the Russian teams for Counter-Strike, and I think he was coming up on his 30s, and they did manage to finally like win a tournament there, and he was one of those players who would have been affected by that. Like there was a really big example where there was an entire round that they played. He was just giving the pep talk, man. Like all of the players were like just sitting there like just kind of waddling around. But meanwhile, you can see his player cam. This guy was giving a speech. It was amazing. It was amazing, and like everybody got fired up. They completely swept them the next couple of rounds and things like that. But without players like that, what would they have been doing instead? But I think that's a really interesting example of how like your age can sort of come into it, like that paradigm where the teams were sort of saying, oh well, if we have one person who's the coach, and then we'll just use the actual players to just be the coaches like pawns, you know. And I'm kind of glad that they've gone the other way, where you do actually have to have someone playing who also makes the decisions.
Yeah, because it sort of takes away that unfair advantage, like you're saying.
Yeah, and it's other games have got that as well. Like fighting games do that as well. Like, what do you do if there's a guy standing behind you, going like, "Okay, kick, okay, punch"? Like that's normal in fighting games as well. Well, they do call it and they even call it coaching, like while you're playing. And you know, but like it's people just get involved, and it's an interesting sort of a little discussion there. But bringing it back a little bit more to the age side of things, where people sort of talk about, you know, people getting older, people washing out and things like that. As far as I can tell, the last proper study that I saw about it was that your natural reaction time will increase by about 15 milliseconds per decade of your life. And I personally tend to think about 15 milliseconds is not really significant, if that makes sense. If you're just measuring reaction time, which is a weird one to measure, because if you're doing a test on reaction time, your reaction time is going to be better because you're expecting to react. But the average human reaction time is about 250 milliseconds, and in some games that is longer than latency. You know,
it's such a small part of the entire experience.
Exactly.
I think anyway.
Yeah. And I think the experience that you would accrue in any given title over that time, part of that will be managing your ability to react to the game in a way that is successful.
Yeah. Yeah. So
well,
I think that's everything that we had for.
We briefly touched on. It's a very brief one. We already touched on it a little bit beforehand, but you do get communities that have like a hard and fast 18 only rule.
We briefly touched on it. Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. We briefly touched on that. Okay, good. No, that's everything then. We're done. We did it.
We can still go down that pathway if you want to.
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
All right.
Pretty cruisy. So that's more or less it. I think that's been this is the old man episode of of the Community Matter. You can find us on wherever you're watching us right now.
Twitch, and I think we'll also be coming to listener not very soon, but soon enough.
Oh, good. That's really exciting.
So you'll be able to listen to this not on Twitch. We're on YouTube. We're on YouTube as well.
Oh, good.
On the Game On Aus
so you'll be able to hear us instead of needing to look at us, because you know, for some people, some people might say I've got a real face for radio. Oh wait, they're being mean. All right.
Thank you very much for tuning into the Community Matter. Until next time, we hope you find your tribe. I've been Morg, and I've been joined by Mighty. And we'll see you next time. See ya.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. Have you clicked the subscribe button yet? Have you given us a thumbs up and maybe commented on the video too? Have you done that yet? Have you done it? Oh, cheers. Thanks.